Matthew, it's so wonderful to be here with you today.
Thank you for having me. It's super dope.
Of course, it is dope. So let's start right now by you telling me what exactly your company does.
So we build software for big buyers of insurance to manage your insurance workflows. So picture a company like Uber, Airbnb, Lyft. You need to run essentially background checks on all your drivers and all your hosts. Every time there's a rental or a trip, you need to have some sort of insurance policy on one of those. And if there's ever an accident or a claim filed, you need somebody to manage it for you. And so we build the software for companies like that to essentially manage all of their insurance workflows.
Very cool. And how did you come up with this idea?
So it goes back a number of years.
Okay.
My brother and I, a couple of years ago, started a company out of our dorm room that would essentially let college students rent cars out from one another. And so that story is actually pretty funny.
Yeah.
We went to a small school called Babson in Wellesley, Massachusetts. And this was back in like 2018. Uber Eats wasn't around, DoorDash, GoPuff, all of these guys weren't around back then. And we really wanted pizza one night. And Papa John's would not deliver to Babson. So my brother and I tried calling them to bribe them. They wouldn't bring the pizza, and so we had to order from a local shop. And when the pizza arrived, my brother walked outside to grab it and saw the parking lot packed to capacity and thought, oh man, it'd be super cool if we could rent another student's car out and go pick up the pizza.
Right.
And so when we started that business, it was called Lula Rides. Insurance was always a tricky situation because 18-year-olds renting cars from other 18-year-olds was not the most enticing thing for insurance companies. And so we had to go back to him and tell him, all right, what if we run everybody under some sort of background check? What if we organize the policies in a specific way on every rental? What if we manage claims in a specific way? And so we had to build out a bunch of insurance tools for that app. And crazy enough, out of our dorm room, we ended up launching it September 1st, 2018. It became a top 100 app on the App Store. Members on more than 500 campuses in all 50 states. It was really funny because people thought it was this big company and it was two kids out of a dorm room. And when COVID shut down college campuses, it forced us to shut down that business. And so we had lost everything. Well, we always say negative $2,800 in our bank account, 2 college dropouts, dead startup. In the middle of a global pandemic, we had to move back in with our parents and everything. And as we were trying to figure out what we were going to do with our life, we got a call from an investor that had passed on us, but we had maintained a pretty good relationship. And he called us and was like, hey, one of my buddies has this opportunity with the US military. They're trying to launch a car sharing program on military bases in Germany and the United States. The insurance companies want them to screen drivers, administer policies, and manage claims in a specific way. Can you help them? And so sure enough, Mike, when I get on to the call with these people, we're like, hey, we have this beautiful car sharing app. We'll white label it to you for cheap. And they're like, no, we just care about the insurance side of things. And so when they asked us what it was going to cost, I was ready to say like $15,000. I didn't think it was going to be a lot of work. And Michael was the more financially literate out of the two of us. He tells him $250,000. And so I hit him in the middle of the call. I'm like, you're an idiot. You just cost us the deal. And the guy on the other side is like, oh man, if it were anything less, I'd be concerned. And I looked at Michael and I said, mother effer, how bad did we just shoot ourselves in the foot? And as soon as that happened, we were like, oh man, people would buy this insurance software. And so that was when we started this new business towards the end of 2020. And it was basically helping these big buyers of insurance manage their insurance. They're running background checks on customers and employees, organizing their policies and managing their claims.
So what made you think that, you could jump from college dropout to being a founder? Like, what made the risk worth the reward for you there?
For me, it was one of the situations where I was in the middle of a global pandemic. So even if I wanted to go back to school, I didn't know what this situation was going to be with school. The other thing that had happened was we had raised a few $100,000 from investors for that first business. And I couldn't fathom calling them and saying, yo, I lost your money. And so my brother and I were like, we can either tell them, yo, we lost your money, or we can tell them, hey, we're going to start a new business. We'll just let your equity roll into this new one. And so we had always told ourselves, we learned so much from that first business, we could almost guarantee success on the next one. And we felt wrong that we always felt like it wouldn't be cool for those guys to see us celebrating a success in the future and being like, oh, the Twins lost me money. And it wasn't even about the money per se, because these were all very affluent guys. The $100,000 they put in was not gonna make a difference in their life. It was more just the principle. And so we've always just had this weird, unusual confidence in our abilities. And I think a lot of that just stems from hearing the stories of our grandparents coming to the United States and everything they overcome, and it was like, if they overcame it, why can't we? And that's what honestly gave us so much confidence. And so when we had this next idea for this new business, a lot of it was just, we don't really have options. We can't go back to school because we don't know what the market's gonna look like. Nobody's gonna hire us with our current experience or our current resume. And we don't wanna call these people and tell them, hey, we lost your money. And so that was really the acting motivation as to, all right, this is why we're gonna start something new, and we're just gonna find a way to make it happen. There's no plan B besides success.
How did those initial investors react then when you said, hey, we're gonna switch gears and do this new company?
They were super salty. Like, there's no other way to put it. They're like, we invested in a car sharing app, now you wanna do something with insurance.
Yeah.
And we told them, like, look, college campuses are closed. There's nothing we can do with this old app. But insurance is actually a bigger deal right now than ever before. Because if you think about it, insurance is that one cost you wanna cut, but you can't afford to eliminate because you need it for legality purposes and all that. And in the middle of the pandemic, where people couldn't hire more employees, they weren't necessarily paying rent, the cost of insurance was more exasperated than ever because they were still being forced to pay it.
Right.
And so we basically were able to come out and say, all right, we'll go to all these different companies that are buying insurance and tell them, hey, if you use Lula to run background checks on customers and employees and all that, we're actually going to save you money from an insurance perspective. And so because of the economic times, people were way more willing to listen to two kids telling them, hey, you're going to cut your insurance costs by X% if you use our software. And so I think the timing itself of being in the middle of a pandemic actually worked out really well for us.
I love those stories that go from like, there's this awful event and then it actually fuels success.
It was the best thing that happened to us.
Wow.
And I think like insurance obviously in up markets is great, but when people are strapped for cash, they still see they can cut their rent, they can cut their head count, but they can't cut their insurance, or they can't cut it entirely.
Right.
And so if you can go to them and tell them, hey, we're gonna help reduce it, they're forced to pay attention whether or not they want to.
Totally. So talk to me then about your fundraising journey since then. What's that been like for you?
So I always say we're the most rejected founders of all time. For that first business, we got rejected by Babson's Accelerator program the first time, Mass Challenge, Techstars. When we started gaining a lot of ground in April 2019 and we tried to raise capital for the first time, I remember we had probably a few $100 left in our bank account. And we decided to buy one-way tickets to San Francisco. And people buy it and hear that story and they're like, oh, you had so much confidence, you booked a one-way ticket, you knew you were gonna close the deal. I was like, no, we just didn't have money for the return flight. And so we went out to San Francisco and we emailed 532 investors.
Wow.
The first 525 either ignored us, passed, rejected us. Investor 526 ends up answering and he's like, hey, can you come next month? There's an event. And I was like, no, if you let me, I'm leaving on a plane tomorrow to Boston to go close my seed round. He's like, all right, can you come in 3 weeks? I'm like, no, I'm gonna go close my seed round in Boston if you let me get on this flight. He's like, all right, can you come tomorrow? And then I was like, yeah, sure. So we go to the event and my brother gives the worst picture of his life. He was just like super nervous. And as soon as he gets off stage, there was an investor waiting for him, and it was one of the investors from this firm. And she's like, hey, Ali Reza, the GP wants to meet you. And then the rest of the investors that are on that list of 532 passed. But all that to say, fundraising for us was always a nightmare early on. It wasn't because we had a bad business. It was just when we started gaining popularity, Uber and Lyft were getting ready to go public. So everybody was just petrified of them as competitors. And then when we had the idea for this business, again, because of our failures raising capital, because it was the middle of a global pandemic, we took a different route. We actually, before we ever spoke to investors, we went out and we got contracts signed. And then once we had about 23 letters of intent, we took that to investors and we're like, hey, look, people are willing to pay us for this stripe for insurance. And because that's like what we call it, the stripe for insurance. And so at that point, we were able to raise $200,000 from Next View Ventures. And then we were able to raise a few $100,000 here and there, but nothing substantial. And then we basically, in summer of 2021, jumped straight to the Series A, which was 18 million. And then there was a bunch of people that joined after that. And then fast forward to today, we've raised about $60 million from Founders Fund, Khosla, SoftBank, Bill Ackman, and it's been insanely different. Like the last round of funding that we just, like our Series A, I remember there was 40 firms that were fighting for our Series A, and I thought that was the craziest thing, given where we had been not too long before. And then we raised our Series B this time around, and I kid you not, we had over 130 firms organically reach out to us in a span of 30 days. And so it's been the most insane thing to go from the 2 kids that couldn't have investors even care for us to now basically have everybody that we've dreamt of in our inbox, and they stay persistent asking us if we want to raise, even though we don't anymore. So the dynamics have been incredible. They've changed so fast, and again, it's all been in less than 3 years. So it's been interesting to be in the midst of it all.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
Congratulations
Thank
on
you.
that.
Thank you.
So talk to me now about the scale of your company. How many customers do you have? How
Yeah.
are sales doing? Anything you can share with us?
Yeah, so we started actually on this new version of the business towards the end of 2020, and then we went out to market with a real product in 2021. And that first year, we were able to hit the $1 million ARR mark, and then in the past, I'd say 16 months, it's just gone gangbusters. We've grown almost 45x in the last 15 months. We'll be the fastest insurance startup to hit $100 million ARR. We'll also hit profitability next year. So not only will we be one of the fastest software companies to hit that revenue mark, but we'll also be one of the only ones to have done it in a super capital efficient way. And so, yeah, the company's growing, revenue's growing quite a bit. And one of the things that we haven't even publicly announced, which I'll say here because I'm super pumped about it, is our new AI product. And so we have an AI product called Gale, Generative AI by Lula, and it was the first AI to just pass the state licensing exams, so to be able to sell insurance. And so now what it is, it's basically a voice-powered AI that can sell insurance to your customers and can service them. And so if all of a sudden you call one of our customers, you'll think you're speaking with a human, but in reality, you're speaking with a robot, and the robot can speak Spanglish, can speak English, Spanish, or Spanglish, and we're building in a way where you can put together, you can give it slang, you can give it certain dialects, certain accents, and so all of a sudden, a Puerto Rican calls the phone, they're not going to think they're speaking with a robot because it's not going to have a Puerto Rican accent. And so, yeah, we'll be
really
announcing
cool.
that in a couple of weeks, but that's probably what I'm most excited about.
That's awesome. And how do you think about the ethics of that with AI? I know that's such a hot topic right now, but how are you looking at it?
I think of it when it comes to the ethics. I actually think I think it's a moral obligation to use this technology, because one of the things that I think about in insurance, and I think about it all the time as a kid that was taken advantage of in the early days of the other business, Lula. Like, heavy insurance component. People saw 2 young kids that had raised $200,000, and they were going to try to squeeze every penny out of us. And so we had insurance brokers that misled us, gave us false information, tried to put in these BS terms, and we actually found out a couple of times that those things weren't legal. And you see that across the insurance industry left and right, that a lot of these brokers, because they're going after their own ulterior motives, higher commissions, all these different things, they tell their customers, oh, you need this, you need that, and they're really just driving up the cost of the deal so they get higher commissions.
Right.
I think this type of stuff is actually perfect because the AI is not collecting commissions on its own behalf, and so it's not going to be misleading the customers, it's not going to be doing any of that weird stuff. I think the other thing too is if you look at the insurance market as a whole, premiums are at an all-time high, and a big reason for that is because labor costs are at an all-time high. And so you look at Florida, for instance, people are seeing their insurance costs increase 100% year over year, and it's driving people out of business, and it's really impacting them. And so now that you have this technology, it doesn't need commissions. That's 20% more that can go into the customer's pockets. And so to me, there's definitely going to have to be some sort of regulatory piece that overlooks it, because like anything, people are going to take advantage of it.
Right.
But I think to a certain extent, we have a moral obligation to use it because it can help people in so many different ways, like giving them affordable insurance.
Yeah, that's an interesting way of looking at it too.
Yeah, I mean, that's our whole goal. My whole goal is to make insurance available to everybody, as we always say, in the universe, because we'll eventually be on Mars now with Elon. But I think AI is the first thing that actually allows for people all over the world to get insurance for a super affordable rate.
What would you say is the most challenging part of running your company?
I would say, so people are always going to talk about like, oh, the hiring, the business, the product. Like we're in the world of insurance, and so it's super heavily regulated. For me, it's not even that. Like the hardest thing by far was, this was my first job. Like my first real job, the only job I had before this was selling women's shoes at Nordstrom for like 2 months, and then working on my family's farm. And so the hardest thing for me was, there's a bunch of articles that tell you how to make your first $10,000 or your first $1 million. Nobody ever tells you what it's like to go from $1 million in revenue to $50 million in 15 months or anything like that.
Right.
And so just having to navigate all those different things on your own is super tough. And of course we have investors and advisors, but again, they haven't even gone through that. And so dealing with life changing so fast, I'd say that's probably like the toughest stuff. And I think the other thing too is, to a certain extent, like the mental side of it. I'm not talking about like depression or anything like that. I'm talking more so just the challenges. You now have 130 adults and their families depending on you, and 2 years ago it was just my brother and I. Like all those different things, the magnitude of decisions. Like sometimes you're just really tired and you can't take a day off because you have all these people waiting for you. And so it's, yeah. And then the other thing too is like you see all these other people that are in your cohort that they're killing it, and sorry for the curse, but like sometimes you look at yourself and you're like, am I shit? Am I stupid?
Right.
But those are thoughts that actually come into your mind. And so for me, the best thing that's helped with that is reading autobiographies, because like you'll see Elon Musk thought the same thing. You'll see Brian Chesky from Airbnb. Like they all went through periods of time in their life where they had these same thoughts. And so it would be unusual if you didn't have these thoughts. And so that to me is like the hardest part, just like the mental piece of it. But it's incredible when you see that it's not unusual to think that it'd be unusual if you didn't have those thoughts.
What would it take to get you to sell your company, and is that your goal ever?
No, it sounds a little bit morbid, but my brother and I always say our exit strategy is death. It's either the company dies or I die in 60, 70 years. Like right now, I'm thankfully at a point where I don't have to worry about money, and selling the company wouldn't really change that for me.
Totally.
And so for me, the goal is to take the company public, which is what we're being set up to do. And then I want to be working on this when I'm in my 50s, 60s, 70s, all that. Like I find this fun for me.
Yeah.
I think that's one of the big competitive advantages that we have, is like people look at this as a job. Like to me, the way that I grew up playing basketball because I loved it, I do this because I have so much fun. And so to sell it would be essentially taking away what I find fun. And so I don't really have interest in that. It's not because the money at this point wouldn't necessarily change my life.
If you could go back in time and tell your younger self something the day before you launched Lula, what would you say? What advice would you have?
This is a good question. It's counterintuitive, but I would say yes to more parties. Like I remember when, like even throughout the whole duration of time, like even now a year ago, like I missed out on so many moments with all my friends and my family and stuff like that. And a lot of times it was just like, oh no, I have to work or I have to get this deadline. And I realized that had I turned something in 3 or 4 hours later, it wouldn't have changed anything. Or if I had taken that vacation, it wouldn't have changed everything. Now, I would have had to maybe come back from the party a bit early and worked, or maybe I would have had to take my laptop on the vacation or whatever. But for me, if I could go back in time, I'd say yes to all the parties and all the vacations, because you're gonna look back on it one day and be like, damn, I miss it. And I think I missed out on so many different things because I thought I had to work. And don't get me wrong, you still have to work crazy hours, but looking back on it, I could have always come back early or something like that. And I missed so many big moments that I wouldn't want to do it again. So that's my big
a
thing
good answer.
to young people is like, say yes to more parties and more vacations.
That sounds fun,
Yeah.
honestly. You keep coming back to mentioning your family and your history and your brother.
Yeah.
One, what's it been like to work with a family member? And two, how has like your family and your history shaped what you're building at Lula?
I think, I always say, and I used to be like this too, like you always say, like founders or entrepreneurs or successful people, the worst thing you can ever tell them is you're lucky. And to a certain extent, I used to hate when people say that, but looking back on my journey, I'm the luckiest person in the world. Like I won the lottery when I had my family, and I didn't grow up with money or anything like that, but I grew up on a small farm. My family gave me everything that I needed to be happy. They were always so supportive. Like that was one of the things I can credit my parents to. Like when I was younger and I wanted to go to the NBA, they never told me, no, you're not going to make it to the NBA. You're going to grow up to be 5'9" and unathletic. They encouraged it. They're like, all right, you want to go to the NBA? How are you going to get there? Okay, so you're going to go take 500 shots a day. You're going to go work out for X number of hours. And it was the same thing with Lula. They were mad when we dropped out because nobody had ever graduated college in my family. And they wanted us to do the same thing. But my dad was like, all right, you're making this decision. You're going to work 9 to 5. I'm going to make sure you work 9 to 5. And so they gave us that structure and they encouraged it. And so I always say, like, I owe everything to my family because even when we failed with the first startup, they could have told us, go back to get a job, go do anything. And they just encouraged us. And so everything that I have today, I owe to them. And when it comes to Michael, I always say is, I'm an affirmative believer that Michael will go down as this generation's Steve Jobs or Bezos. And I wish he could have been here instead of me. And I always tell people, it's like, one of the reasons I get so excited to come to work is like, how would you feel if you got to work with Steve Jobs or your generation every day? Like, you'd be super stoked. And it's been incredible to work with him. I think one of the big things too is because we're twins, we grew up so close, we have an unfair advantage when I think about other competitors. Like, we go to the gym together, we live in the same apartment, we drive to work every day on the same, and so we're always talking. And I think one of the things that's really cool is I never have to guess his motives. A lot of times founders don't know if somebody's on the same wavelength as them, if somebody has the same character, if somebody has the same ambition. I know how crazy I am and how intense I am, and I have a clone of me. And so,
Literally.
Literally. So while most companies are fortunate they just have one elite founder, I think we're in a really good spot because we have two of basically the same person. And he's more business oriented, I'm more technology oriented. There's like the big differences between us, but it's been a dream working with him, and I have to give him credit. All the ideas that we've had have been his result. I got CEOs because of a coin toss.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow,
Yeah.
that's funny. That's amazing.
Yeah, it's been awesome.
Yeah. So what's next for you? Any new exciting things in 2024? I know you told the
Yeah,
AI, but any other?
I think and I hate to say the AI stuff because I feel like I'm riding a trend, but I think the AI stuff is going to be incredible, and we were working on it before it was a buzzword. It's just now the timing of things. But I think I'm an affirmative believer that generative AI is going to have a bigger impact on the world of insurance than the World Wide Web and Internet did. And when I think about the landscape of companies that are out there to actually bring it to the world of insurance, I think we're the best ones suited for it. We've now been in the insurance industry for a number of years. We're well capitalized, have real customers and real revenue, which allows us to have real data we can train the models on. And so I think we're in a really great position. I think the other thing too is that I'm a big believer that the best time to build a company is once the market for that particular company has crashed. And so if you look at Stripe, for instance, Stripe came out after the 2008 global recession. You look at Airbnb, came as a result of the banking crisis. You look at where the market is for insurtechs. $50 billion has been invested in insurtechs the last decade. Nobody in this room can probably name a single insurance unicorn right now. Like, you look at Lemonade, Root, Hippo, Metromile, Trove, have tremendous respect for all of them. They paved the way for us, but their stock prices have tanked. And so when I think about the insurtech market, I think right now is a perfect time to build it. And I think this technology, generative AI, and what we're doing with it is going to allow us to pave the way and build something special. And I think the product that I will die being remembered for is this product, Gale, that's coming out to market in 2024.
You mentioned like Lemonade and all those.
Yeah.
Do you see them still as heavy competition?
So I never really saw them as competition. This is one of the interesting things. We were fortunate enough that we always stayed just technology for insurance. Metromile, Root, Lemonade, all of those, they actually became insurance carriers. So they were paying claims out whenever there was an accident. We always made sure that we stayed on the software side of things. And early on, we wanted to go the route of those guys. And when we started seeing what a regulatory nightmare it was, we decided to just stay on software because I don't have to ask somebody for permission to launch a new software product, but I have to ask like 1 million people permission if I want to launch a new insurance product. Right. And so that was like the big differentiator between us and everybody else. And that was actually one of the big issues we had when we would go raise capital. Everybody would say, all right, you're an insurtech, so you must be like Lemonade and Root. And it's like, no, they pay claims. We just focus on the software. And so that was, even now at the size we are, that was still one of the big complexities that we had. It's like, hey, don't look at the market for us. We're building something entirely new.
Excellent. Well, Matthew, it's been such a pleasure to hear your story. So thank you for sitting with me.
Thank you for having me.